They say mirrors don't lie. But what if they don't just reflect you? What if they remember you? This is the story of a missing woman, a house with no past, and a man who looked into the glass and saw something else looking back. Subscribe for more. I remember the first time I saw the house. It was early autumn, the kind where the air tastes like cold iron and the leaves crumble under your boots like ash. I just arrived in a quiet town on England's south coast, Cliffhaven, a place neither large enough to be anonymous, nor small enough to feel quaint. It was one of those towns that had once tried to be something, but failed. Coastal tourism had dried up, and the internet economy had passed it by. I was renting a 2-up 2-down on Gibson Lane, a narrow, curved street where brick houses leaned forward like they were listening in on your conversations. My neighbor to the left was an elderly widower who spent his days feeding pigeons and coughing at the news. The house to the right, number 13, was always dark, its curtains drawn, the garden overgrown and wild. No cars, no lights, no sounds. It was as if the place had simply been forgotten by time. I hadn't thought much of it until the night the visitor arrived. It was just past midnight, and I'd been struggling to sleep. I wasn't new to insomnia. It had followed me across 2 countries and a dozen years of journalism. I was used to being awake when others weren't. So I was sitting by the window, sipping cheap tea, when I saw the car. It was a black Vauxhall Astra, older model, nothing flashy. Pulled up slowly, headlights off, engine barely humming. A man stepped out, thin, average height, wearing a long coat and a beanie. He moved with the kind of purpose you don't see in someone just visiting a friend. He didn't look around. He walked straight to the front door of number 13 and knocked once. Just once. Then the door opened. I sat up straighter. No lights had come on. No movement had been visible behind the curtain. And yet, someone had opened the door. The man slipped inside. The door closed, and the house went quiet again. I stared for a long time, waiting for something more. But nothing happened. The street returned to silence. The only sound, the ticking of the radiator behind me and the occasional cough from the old man next door. The next morning, number 13 looked just as abandoned as always. Same wilted hedges, same chipped paint. But something had changed in me. That knock, that opening door, it had scratched at something old and familiar. Curiosity. And curiosity, for someone like me, is a dangerous thing. Cliffhaven wasn't a town you moved to by accident. People either came here to retire, to disappear, or to start over. I was in the third category, though I had flirted with the second. After 20 years as a crime reporter in Chicago, I'd burned out hard. Too many bodies, too many lies. So I'd taken a sabbatical, a mental health break, as my editor politely called it. But I couldn't let the itch go. Not entirely. Later that day, I asked the postman, young guy, maybe 25, looked like he still lived with his mom, what he knew about number 13. Not much, he said. Been empty a while. No one on my round gets anything for it. Ever seen anyone come or go? He looked uncomfortable. Don't think so. Why? Just curious. I lied. He hesitated. Old stories, though. House has a bit of a reputation. What kind? He glanced at the house, then lowered his voice. Woman who lived there years ago. They say she just vanished. Left everything behind. Even her cat. What happened? Dunno. Police looked into it. No body. No signs of a struggle. Just gone. Name was Beatrice Langford, I think. It was all in the paper back then. That was before my time. That night, I searched the local archives. Took me a couple hours, but I found it. Beatrice Langford, 42. Disappeared October 17, 2003. No family. A few work colleagues at the local library. House was searched. No signs of foul play. Police suspected voluntary disappearance but never closed the file. What struck me most was the photo. She looked plain, bookish, glasses, faint smile. Not the type you'd expect to just vanish. But then, the ones who do rarely are. The next few days passed quietly. No more visitors. No strange cars. But number 13 kept tugging at my mind like a thread you can't stop pulling. So one afternoon, I walked over and knocked. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. I leaned close to the frosted glass pane in the door. There was dust on the inside. Not cobwebbed, but definitely untouched. Yet there was no mail piling up inside. No flyers. No papers. Someone had been clearing it out, or stopping it from building up. The moment I turned to leave, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Movement behind the upstairs curtain. A subtle twitch, like a hand had brushed it aside. I looked up fast, but the curtain was still. I didn't sleep well that night. By the time the second visitor came, it was almost a week later. Same routine, late night, car with no headlights, quiet knock. Only this time I was ready. I crept outside, staying low behind the hedge, and managed to get a better look. This one was a woman, maybe mid-30s. Long hair, dark clothes. She knocked, the door opened, and she disappeared inside. I crossed the street after the car left. This time I brought a camera. Not a phone, too much glare. Proper Nikon, quiet as a whisper. I took a few shots of the front of the house, especially around the door. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The mailbox was sealed shut with tape. Not broken, not weathered. Fresh tape. Clean. Like someone had deliberately stopped anything from being put through. The door frame also looked reinforced. A different shade of wood, slightly newer, like it had been replaced recently. Why? Back home, I loaded the photos and zoomed in. Something was off about the front door. The lock had 3 cylinders, not 2. That was unusual for a town like Cliffhaven. Expensive, professional-grade security. Someone was protecting something, or someone, and then I found the clue that changed everything. In one of the shots, taken just as the door had opened a crack, a small, unmistakable symbol was visible. Etched near the handle, almost like a stamp burned into the wood. A sigil. I didn't recognize it at first, but something about it felt ritualistic. Religious, even. And then it hit me. I'd seen something similar in a story I covered back in the States. A case that never left me. A woman in Massachusetts, missing. Her home bore strange markings like this one. Police dismissed it as vandalism. But 3 months later, 5 people in her circle had vanished. One body was recovered. The others were never found. I pulled out the old files from that case. Same shape, same size, different arrangement, but clearly from the same family of symbols. Suddenly, I wasn't just curious. I was afraid. What was number 13 hiding? That night, I wrote everything down. I organized the photos, the police clippings, my notes. Something was happening at that house, and it wasn't new. It was part of something older, older than the town, older than Beatrice Langford. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that cold knot of dread I hadn't felt since Chicago. The feeling you get when you realize you're not investigating a crime. You're stepping into one, and it's still happening. It's a strange thing, fear. You don't always feel it like a shiver or a scream. Sometimes it comes quietly, like static under your skin. That night, after I'd seen the sigil, I sat awake for hours, scrolling through photos, comparing markings, piecing things together. I knew I couldn't explain it to anyone, not without sounding paranoid or worse. But I also knew with absolute certainty that what I had stumbled into wasn't random. So I dug deeper. The next morning, I drove an hour inland to the county records office in Lewis, hoping to find deeds, ownership records, anything linking number 13 to a name that might make sense of it all. The staff weren't exactly welcoming, but a bit of journalistic bluff, mentioning a supposed documentary on coastal disappearances, got them to let me dig. The last known owner on file was, as expected, Beatrice Langford. The title had never officially changed hands. The house taxes had been paid consistently until 2004. then sporadically after that by a London-based law firm acting as custodian. No estate sale, no probate filing, nothing normal, just bureaucratic fog. But then came the strange part. Between 2005 and 2020, there were 5 official noise complaints logged against number 13. Not from neighbors, from anonymous callers, always at odd hours, always the same phrasing, chanting, banging screams. Each time the police were dispatched, each time the house was found empty. No follow-up, no arrest, just reports filed and forgotten. I requested copies. The clerk handed them over with a raised eyebrow. "You're not the first to ask about that place," he said casually. I froze. "Who else asked?" He frowned, flipping through a mental catalog. "Some guy a few months back, American accent, I think, said he was doing a piece on haunted properties." "Did he give a name?" "No, just showed ID, signed the log, took his copies and left." "Did he say where he was staying?" He shrugged. "Didn't ask." I thanked him and left, heart pounding. Someone else was looking into number 13, and recently, the idea that I wasn't alone should have comforted me. Didn't. It made it worse. Back in Cliffhaven, the street looked the same. Quiet, harmless, but the silence now felt staged, like a backdrop in a play waiting for the curtain to rise. I started watching the house from my upstairs window more deliberately. Morning, afternoon, night, I logged everything. The comings and goings, the lights, the smallest details. But for days there was nothing. Then one afternoon the door opened. No car, no knock, it just opened. I watched as a woman stepped out. She was middle-aged, slim, wearing a long gray coat. Her hair was cropped close, and she walked with a strange stiffness, like she wasn't used to moving freely. She looked both ways and then crossed the street. As she passed directly in front of my window, I saw her face. She looked exactly like Beatrice Langford. Same cheekbones, same eyes. A little older, yes, but unmistakable. I rushed to grab my camera, but by the time I fumbled it into place, she was gone. I ran outside. Nothing. No footsteps. No trace. But I knew what I'd seen. Beatrice Langford was supposed to be dead. Or vanished. Yet she had walked out of her house as if she'd never left. I had to talk to someone. The only person I trusted, and barely at that, was Margot Leigh, a retired detective inspector who lived on the other side of town. She'd handled the Langford case back in 2003, and I'd interviewed her briefly after I moved here for a puff piece on unsolved local crimes. She wasn't warm, but she respected good questions. When I called her, she hesitated. "I told you I'm done with that case. You said it was strange." "Strange doesn't mean I want it back in my life." "I saw her." There was a long pause. "Who?" "Beatrice Langford. Yesterday. She walked out of the house." "You're mistaken." "I'm not." Another pause. Then she exhaled sharply. "Come over. But don't record anything." Margot's house was neat, clinical. Framed commendations lined the hallway. She served me instant coffee without asking if I wanted it. "You're not the first person to claim they saw Beatrice after 2003, she said bluntly. "We had reports, spottings, letters, even a phone call. All dead ends. People see what they want." I don't think this was imagination. And there's more. There's a symbol on the door. Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of symbol?" I drew it from memory. She stared at the sketch for a long time. "We saw something like that during the original investigation. Behind the wallpaper in the upstairs bedroom. Carved into the wood beneath. Did anyone analyze it?" "We tried. No results. Not occult, not gang-related. Just unexplained." I showed her the police reports about the noise complaints, the anonymous tips, the silence. Finally, she sat back and crossed her arms. Beatrice Langford was involved in something. We never figured out what. The neighbors said she kept to herself, but we found evidence of late-night meetings. Books on mysticism, not the amateur stuff. Serious texts. Like what? Translations of early Christian heresies. Gnostic material. Stuff even theology professors avoid. What do you think she was doing? I think she was part of something old and secretive, and I think they're still using that house. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, Beatrice's, drifting past my window like a ghost walking home. I pulled up the photo from 2003 again, compared it to what I remembered. The resemblance was too exact. No way it was coincidence. But if she was alive, where had she been for 20 years? And why had no one else seen her? Just past 1 a.m., I saw movement again. This time I didn't wait. I grabbed my coat, camera, and flashlight and stepped into the dark. Gibson Lane was deathly still. No traffic, no wind, just the crunch of gravel under my boots. I crossed the road and stood in front of number 13. The door was closed, curtains drawn. I circled around back through the alley, quietly, carefully, and found the rear garden as overgrown as ever. But something was different. The grass had a path in it, a narrow trail through the weeds like someone had walked it recently. I followed it. It led to a cellar door, half covered in ivy. I knelt, brushed the vines away, and tested the handle. Unlocked. Heart pounding, I lifted the door. It groaned softly, revealing old wooden steps descending into pitch black. I clicked on my flashlight. It flickered once, then stabilized. I took a deep breath and stepped down. The air smelled like damp stone and burnt wax. The cellar was empty, almost. At the far end stood a crude wooden table, and on it, an arrangement of objects. A cracked mirror, a bird skull, a bundle of what looked like human hair, and a small cloth-bound book. I stepped closer. The mirror reflected nothing. Not the room, not me, just darkness. I opened the book. It wasn't in English, Latin mostly, some Greek, handwritten notes in the margins, dates, symbols, references to something called the calling of the absent. Suddenly I heard a creak from above, the cellar door, closing. I ran up the steps, flashlight shaking. The door slammed shut just as I reached it. I hit it hard, yelling. Silence. Then faint footsteps above me. Someone was in the house. It took me 20 minutes to force the door open with a rusted pipe I found downstairs. By the time I got out, the street was empty, lights still off, curtains still drawn. But the door had been locked from outside, and I had proof someone or something was still in that house, watching, waiting. By morning, I couldn't tell if the events in the cellar had truly happened or if exhaustion had warped my perception. The items were gone. The cellar was empty again. The mirror, the skull, even the book, as if someone had swept through just minutes after I escaped. I needed clarity, so I returned to Margot Leigh. She didn't answer her phone, which didn't surprise me. Her interest in the case was reluctant at best. I showed up unannounced. "Christ, you look awful," she said, letting me in. "Come in before my neighbors think I'm harboring a fugitive." I explained what happened, every detail. She listened in silence, nodding occasionally, her face taut with restrained concern. "You saw a mirror that didn't reflect?" she asked after a long pause. I nodded. "And the book? It had a name, The Calling of the Absent." She went pale. "I've seen that title before," she whispered. "Years ago, at an academic seminar on forbidden texts. A lecturer from Cambridge presented a list of manuscripts that were either lost, suppressed, or too dangerous to circulate. Too dangerous? Not for what they said, for what they did to the people who read them. Margot got up and rummaged through a filing cabinet. After several minutes, she returned with a photocopy of a handwritten page. Across the top in faded ink, Libri Obscura, the Obsidian Ledger. Below were a dozen titles. The Calling of the Absent was third on the list. It was believed to be a Gnostic resurrection manual, she explained, written sometime in the 4th century AD and suppressed by early church councils. Rumors say it contains rites for communing with the dead. Not metaphorically, literally. I felt a chill slide down my spine. There's something else, I said. That sigil on the door? I've started seeing it elsewhere, scratched faintly into the benches along the pier, etched into a rock outside the fish market. I even saw it on a church window, barely visible unless you're looking. Then it's not just the house, she said slowly. It's the town. That afternoon, I took Margot's advice and visited St. Kilian's, the oldest church in Cliff Haven. A narrow, ivy-covered stone building perched at the edge of the cliff. It overlooked the channel like a watchtower. Inside, it smelled of incense and old books. The vicar, Father Neil, was cordial but wary. When I brought up the sigil, he stiffened. It's just an old mason's mark, he said too quickly. But it doesn't match any known masonry symbols, I countered. I've checked. He adjusted his collar. I think you're reading too much into this. Cliff Haven's full of forgotten carvings and bored teenagers with knives. I didn't press, but before I left, I walked the nave alone and snapped photos of the window panels. Back home, I examined them more closely. The same symbol, tucked into the stained glass borders, subtle, deliberate. Not vandalism, design. Then I saw something worse. In one window, a scene depicting the resurrection of Lazarus. I spotted a faint figure in the background, robed and faceless, arms raised in the same pose I had seen carved into the cellar table. A mirror lay at its feet. It wasn't part of any traditional Lazarus depiction. Someone had altered the image or inserted something never meant to be there. That night, I went to the beach. The tide was out, and the moon painted the rocks silver. I needed air, distance, but even the sea couldn't clear the dread building inside me. I noticed a light flickering in the distance, just beyond the rocky outcrop at the far end of the beach, near the old World War II pillbox. I followed it, expecting kids with lanterns. Instead, I found a man, middle-aged, pale, unshaven. He stood barefoot in the wet sand, humming quietly to himself while carving a spiral into the shore with a piece of driftwood. I approached carefully. "You all right?" He turned, startled. "Oh, yes, I'm fine. What's that you're drawing?" He looked down, then smiled faintly. "Just marking the lines. They told me to." "Who did?" He blinked slowly, as if remembering something that hurt. "The silent ones. Do you live here in Cliff Haven?" "I did. Left. Came back. Couldn't stay away. No one ever really leaves, you know." "What's your name?" Daniel Withers." My heart skipped. That was the name listed on the police reports, the one who made 3 of the noise complaints about number 13. I pulled out my phone and showed him the sigil. He recoiled, dropping the stick. "Don't show me that. It sees you when you look at it." "What does?" But he was backing away, shaking his head. "You shouldn't be asking questions," he said hoarsely. "That house remembers, and it collects." "Collects what?" "People, faces, time." Then he turned and ran into the night. I returned home shaken. As I entered, I found an envelope under my door. No stamp, no writing, just a black wax seal bearing the same sigil. Inside, a single page, typed, "You are waking things that should remain asleep. This is not a story. This is not a myth. Stop digging or be buried with the rest of them. You have 3 days. No name, no signature, just that warning." I slept with a knife on the nightstand and all the lights on. The next day, I visited the Cliff Haven Historical Society. It was a cramped, dust-choked office above the post office, curated by a wiry old man named Graham Teague who smelled of pipe smoke and mothballs. He was eager to talk. "People say Cliff Haven's boring," he chuckled. "But we've got secrets." I mentioned the Langford case. He nodded knowingly. Beatrice's lot were strange. Her father was a classic scholar, kept to himself. There were whispers even back in the 50s. Candlelight meetings, Latin prayers. Folks said they were harmless eccentrics. But after the fire in '61, that all changed. What fire? He led me to a locked drawer and pulled out a yellowed file labeled Cliffhaven Incident, March 1961. Inside were news clippings, photos, and an official report. The Langford home, then at Cliffhaven Manor, not number 13, had burned almost entirely. No official cause. Fire brigade claimed it spread unnaturally fast. 5 people died. All were visitors. No IDs. No family inquiries. One photo stopped me cold. It was of the manor's scorched cellar. In the center, a mirror, identical to the one I'd seen in number 13. What happened to the manor? Demolished. That land's a park now. And the Langfords? Disappeared. All except Beatrice. She would have been a child then. A survivor. The survivor. That night, I returned to the cellar with a crowbar and a plan. If the book was gone, maybe the floorboards hid more. I pried one loose, then another, and another. Below was dirt and something solid. Stone. I dug with my hands until I uncovered a flat slab. It had no markings, no seams. Just a faint warmth despite the cold night. As I brushed away the last of the soil, I heard a whisper. Not in the room. In my head. Said just one word. Return. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The word, return, echoed in my mind like a chant whispered through cracked walls. It didn't feel like a memory or an intrusive thought. It felt sent, deliberate, insistent, as if something beneath that stone slab was aware of me. By morning, my hands were raw and aching from digging. I stared at the floorboards I'd yanked up, the dust still hanging in the air like fog, and knew I couldn't leave them open, not just for safety, but because I feared what might crawl out. I sealed the floor, not with nails or screws, but with bricks. I laid them hastily, messily, covering the slab beneath. Then I poured cement over it, right there in the cellar. It was crude and sloppy, but I didn't care. I needed a barrier, something permanent. When it set, I left. I walked the entire town twice, trying to clear my mind. Cliffhaven felt different now. Not just eerie, but aware. People stared longer. Conversations paused when I passed. At the fish market, a boy no older than 8 pointed at me and said, "That's him," before his mother yanked him away, whispering something urgent into his ear. It wasn't paranoia. I knew I was being watched. Back in my flat, I scoured the internet. Every record, every myth, every blog post that might connect the calling of the absent or the Langfords to any known religious or occult practices. Most roads led nowhere, fringe forums, dead links, or conspiracies involving lizard people and Atlantis. But one post stood out. It was buried in a closed anthropology forum archived years ago. The thread was titled, "Ritual Houses, UK-US Transatlantic Mirrors." The user claimed that certain houses built between 1910 and 1970 in both Britain and America followed identical architectural runes. Not designs, runes. Embedded into blueprints were arrangements of doors, windows, and staircases that mirrored ancient temple patterns. The purpose? To tether spiritual energy through symmetry. 3 homes were named. One in Muncie, Indiana, burned down in 1949. One in Cliffhaven, UK, and the third crossed out, no location listed. The post was signed by a JW No Other Activity. The user account had been deactivated. I reached out anyway. I didn't expect a reply, but within the hour, my inbox pinged. Subject, "You found it." From jw.research.archives@protonmail.com *. You're the first to look in 10 years. I knew it would resurface. I didn't know it would be that house. Stop digging. It's not just a house. It's a wound, and you're making it bleed. You need to leave Cliffhaven before you're not allowed to. I stared at the email. Then I stared at my reflection in the monitor. And for the first time, I noticed My eyes weren't the same color they used to be. I needed answers, not from books or online posts, from someone who lived through it. So I returned to Margot Leigh. She greeted me at her door with an expression that told me she'd been expecting me. She poured coffee without asking and sat across from me at the small kitchen table. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The whisper, the stone, the voice in my head, the email, even the color of my eyes. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a thick, red leather book, unlabeled, dusty. "I wasn't entirely honest with you," she said. "This town's history isn't something I studied for a thesis. My grandfather was the vicar of St. Killian's. The man you met, Father Neil, he's his son. My uncle. Then you know about the symbol?" She nodded. "It's older than Christianity. My grandfather called it the mark of the absent. Said it was carved into the foundation stones of the oldest homes here. Only a few. They formed a boundary, perimeter, around something buried. Something? No one's sure what it is. Only that it's not dead. Not alive either. It's waiting." She opened the book. Inside were drawings, Latin passages, symbols, pages that looked like they belonged in a medieval grimoire. "There's a word that keeps coming up," she said, "in different dialects, always translated the same way, the returning. It's not about resurrection, not like we think of it. It's about replacing." "Replacing what?" She turned the book around. There, sketched in ink, was a mirror. But in its reflection stood a figure completely different from the man staring into it. A different face, different clothes, only the eyes were the same. "It's not about bringing people back," she said. "It's about bringing others through." That night, I went back to number 13. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to prove I still had control. The house was silent. Still, the bricks I'd laid in the cellar were hard and cold under my fingers. Nothing had shifted, but the air had changed. Smelled like salt and rust. I walked to the mirror, the one I'd retrieved from the attic weeks ago and shoved behind a tarp. It was uncovered now, and someone was looking at me from the other side. Not my reflection, not even human. Its face was wrong. Too long, too flat, its mouth stretched too wide. But its eyes were mine. It lifted a hand. So did I, but it was half a second faster. It smiled. I didn't. Then it stepped forward. The glass didn't break. It absorbed the figure, and for a moment, the room pulsed, like a heart beating under the floorboards. I fell backward, trembling, and when I looked again, the mirror was empty. Just my reflection. Normal, but I could feel something had shifted, like a gear clicked into place. Something had returned. The next morning, I was packing to leave. I didn't care about the job, the project, the unfinished article. I was done. That's when I got the call. Margot was missing. Her flat door had been left open. Inside, a single object sat on the floor. A mirror, not broken, but stained with something dark. Something that wasn't there the day before. The mirror was cold. Too cold. Even though the sun had been up for hours and Margot's flat was warm, the glass radiated a chill that made my bones ache. I hovered over it, careful not to touch, half expecting it to ripple like water or shatter with a scream. But it just reflected me. Only me. For now. Margot was gone. Vanished. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. Her phone was still charging next to her bed. Her kettle was still warm. She had been taken or pulled from one world into another. I was sure of it, because the glass hummed when I leaned closer, and I swear I saw her breath against the inside of it. Back at number 13, the bricks I had laid over the cellar floor had cracked. A clean fissure ran down the middle, as if something beneath had flexed and split it open from below. I poured salt across the floor, an old superstition from my grandmother, and drew the sigil in chalk at every corner of the cellar. I didn't know if it would stop anything, but I needed the illusion of control. And then I locked myself in the study and opened the red book Margot had left behind. I read for hours. The details were inconsistent, fragmented, written across centuries by trembling hands in different languages. But one truth emerged. The absent were not spirits. They were not demons. They were reflections without anchors. They waited outside of time, beyond the veil of the world, looking through any polished surface they could find. Not just mirrors, water, glass, even dreams. When a person lingered near them too long, stared too deeply, the absent began to mimic. Not just appearances, but emotions, memories. They learned their way in. And if the anchor weakened through fear, trauma, or belief, they crossed. And once they did, the original vanished, sometimes forever. The book detailed a method called the reversal rite. It wasn't a banishment. It was an exchange. You could retrieve someone taken by the absent, but only by trading your reflection for theirs. One went in, one came out. The ritual required 3 things: a true name of the taken, spoken with intent, a mirror that had touched both souls, a witness, someone who remembered the taken as they truly were. It also came with a warning. The absent may lie. They may wear the face of your friend. You must know the difference, or they stay, and you don't. I closed the book. I had the name. I had the mirror. But the witness, I needed someone who truly knew Margot. Someone whose memory hadn't been tainted by whatever the house had twisted in me. And there was only one option left. Father Neil. He wasn't happy to see me. He opened the door only a sliver, his eyes dark with fatigue. "She's gone," I said. "Margot, taken." He didn't ask how I knew. Instead, he stepped aside and let me in. I explained the ritual, the mirror, the rules. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed me one. "When we were children," he said, "Margot used to climb into the bell tower and pretend she could speak to birds. She believed the wind was a language, not just noise." He drank. "I believe you, but I won't help you." "Why not?" He looked at me then, full and hard. "Because I did, once, with my father. In 1961. My blood froze. "The fire?" I asked. He nodded. "There were 6 of us. One was taken. My father tried to bring her back. The ritual worked. She stepped out of the mirror, looked like her, sounded like her, but it wasn't her." "What happened?" She smiled at him, and then slit his throat with a shard of glass, before she vanished into the woods. His hand trembled slightly as he set the glass down. "So you understand what's at stake?" I said. "Help me make sure it doesn't happen again." He stared at me for a long time, then nodded once. We returned to number 13 just before midnight. The mirror stood propped on the cellar wall, glowing faintly in the candlelight. We sat before it on either side, a circle of salt between us, the red book open in my lap. I spoke her name, Margot Evelyn Leigh. The mirror shuddered. Not the frame, not the wall, the glass, like a pond struck by wind. And then it cleared. She stood on the other side, dressed in the same jumper she wore the night I last saw her. Her hair tied back, eyes wide, her lips forming my name. "Are you sure it's her?" I whispered to Father Neil. He squinted, then smiled softly. "Yes, that's her." I recited the rite, each line exact, each syllable like swallowing thorns. And the mirror opened. She stepped through. She was shaking, cold, real. I wrapped a coat around her and held her as her knees buckled. "It was endless," she sobbed. "I couldn't see anything, just myself, my thoughts, over and over, like being drowned in your own mind." Then she looked past me. "Where's the priest?" I turned. Father Neil was gone. Only his chair remained, still warm. I searched the house, every room, every corner. Nothing. But when I returned to the mirror, it shimmered. And standing behind the glass, just for a second, was Father Neil. Only it wasn't him. The thing inside smiled, lifted a single finger to its lips, and whispered, "Shoo." For the next 2 days, Margot and I stayed at the village inn, away from number 13. She was quiet, haunted, but lucid. She ate little, slept less, but her hands were warm, her reflection consistent. She was real. At least I told myself she was. She remembered things only she and I had shared. She could recall the exact line I misspelled in the article draft I let her proofread. She even teased me for calling the village quaint too many times. I watched her constantly, searching for cracks. I found none. But the problem wasn't with her. It was with me. I began to notice delays. In mirrors, my own reflection sometimes lagged behind by less than a second. Barely noticeable, but real. In a cafe window, I turned my head and saw my mirrored self turn just after me. In a puddle outside the church, I blinked, and my reflection didn't. At first I thought it was stress, lack of sleep, trauma. Then one night, in the inn's bathroom, I stood in front of the mirror and spoke aloud. "Who are you?" And my reflection smiled. Even though I didn't, I tried to explain it to Margot. She listened, calm, focused. "I think you left something behind," she said quietly. "Or maybe it followed you out." I remembered what the book said. The absent may lie. They may mimic. You must know the difference. Where they stay, and you don't. What if I was no longer only me? What if I had brought something through with her? Or worse, what if I had traded places without realizing it? We contacted JW again, the anonymous researcher. I wrote, "I think I brought something back with me. How do I know I'm still me?" The reply was brief. "You're not, but that doesn't mean it wins. Not yet. The house still remembers you, and memory is your only weapon now. Return to it. Finish the story. Close the circle." So we did. We returned to number 13. It was different now. The air was heavier, not dusty but dense, pressurized, like stepping into a sealed room underwater. The cellar had cracked open again. The concrete split, the bricks warped outward, as though something had tried to push through. The mirror still stood, but its surface was clouded, not with dust or age, but with breath, like someone was exhaling on the other side. I stood in front of it. My reflection appeared. Perfect. Too perfect. I moved my left hand. So did it. I stepped back. I stepped forward. Then it smiled. That same offbeat, wrong smile I'd seen in the church mirror. Slightly too wide. Upper lip never moving. And then it spoke. "You've seen us. Heard us. Let us in. Why pretend now?" I said nothing. Continued. "You think you're human because you feel fear. But that's the first thing we learn to mimic." I reached for the red book, opened to the final page. There were no words, just a drawing, a cracked mirror. Below it, the single word, "unmake." I understood what it meant. This wasn't about reversing the exchange anymore. That had passed. This was about sealing the passage, destroying the opening, making the wound forget, to unmake the connection between here and there. I looked at Margot. "You need to leave," I said. She shook her head. "Not again. You already came back. I won't let you be pulled in again." She stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. "If you're wrong, and you're not really you." She took my hand. "You've done a hell of a job pretending." She left. I took the red book, the chalk, the salt, the candles, and one last thing. The mirror from Margot's flat. The one that first showed me the shift. I placed it beside the one in the cellar. 2 mirrors, 2 portals, 2 cells. I drew the sigil between them. Then I lit the candles. Spoke the words not from memory but from belief. Real belief. The kind that makes things move. The cellar shook. The glass began to hum. My reflection stepped forward again, but now it had changed. It was no longer just me. It was all of me, every thought I never voiced, every fear I never faced. It was rage, shame, grief. It was the version of me that should have stayed behind. It whispered, "You can't kill me. I was always here." I struck the mirror with the hammer. Once, twice. The surface cracked, but didn't break. I screamed, not aloud. Inside my skull, I fell to my knees, vision swimming. Then one final blow, and the glass shattered. Not just one mirror, both. The circle broke. The chalk burned. The house moaned, deep and long, like metal warping under pressure. And then, silence. They found me in the cellar an hour later. Margot had called emergency services. She said I hadn't answered my phone. They pulled me out. I was conscious, breathing, covered in cuts. But my reflection matched me again. Exactly. I left Cliffhaven the next week. So did Margot. We parted with a long hug and no promises. Just relief. The article never got published. My editor didn't believe a word of it. Said it sounded like a ghost story dressed up as local lore. Maybe that's all it ever was. Maybe that house was just old. Maybe trauma makes you see things. Or maybe, when you stare long enough into a mirror, something begins to stare back. Something without form, without time, waiting for someone lonely enough, broken enough, to invite it in.